Well, before we get to that, we got to talk about climate, specifically what we're up against. And, we're preparing for COP26. We did a pretty in-depth interview and conversations with our friends at La Ruta de Clima pretty recently on COP26 and what that's going to mean, one, for tackling climate change, but specifically for Latin America. People should definitely check that out. And if people listen to that interview, we're not very optimistic about what's going to come out of it. But I've been thinking a lot about the way that climate change is being talked about in the media and the way that a lot of people are sort of interacting with it in the political sphere. And I've been getting nervous specifically about some of the slogans that we put forward on the left. Like, many on the left say things like, there is no solution to climate change under capitalism. And that's certainly true in the sense that whatever they do is not going to be equitable. We're already seeing this kind of patchwork and ineffective model for dealing with climate change. And there's no doubt that, wealthy folks are already preparing themselves for catastrophe and are sort of hoping that they can, have a golden parachute out of the end of the world, right? I'm not saying that slogan is not true in the sense that, like, whatever they're trying to do is going to be, whatever they're trying to do is going to be inadequate. But the fact is that we're already seeing the signs that they're at least going to motion towards action, right? And I think it's really important that we start to prepare ourselves for, greenwashing at a mass scale, and for also being able to come at these kind of inefficient plans that we're seeing from governments around the world, and specifically the United States. And especially because we're out of power, we need to make sure, because people are asking for action, right? I mean, we've been living through years now of mass actions, of people demanding that governments start to act on climate change,
including workers of those companies.
Yes, and we'll get to that, and that's why we supported just transition and all that kind of stuff as well, right? But I think it's just really important that we start to move past the just like we demand action stage to actually starting to put forward a bold vision. This tweet here from Fred Stafford, I think, really highlighted this dichotomy here. This is a piece that just came out in the New York Times about the Biden administration under Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is basically going to lease out federally owned land to wind generation companies, right? Wind power generation companies. And as Fred Stafford notes here, federal waters along most of the United States coastline will soon be leased to private developers to build and sell output of offshore wind. We're a long way from New Deal ideas about public power, sadly. And that, I think, really highlights one of the kind of tragic aspects of the moment that we're in. Like, in this kind of moment of clear crisis, right, where something has to be done about climate change, we still haven't been able to develop at least a public enough critique to start to even imagine what a different system would look like. And it looks like what is going to end up happening is that we're going to import all of the worst aspects of fossil fuel capitalism into green renewable energy capitalism, right? Just because they're green industries, for example, does not mean that they're going to be any nicer to workers or anything like that. That's why we need to have a just transition, and we need to be fighting for unionized workforces here. This is another example too, where this is new industry. This is industry that the United States government is going to be spending a lot of money promoting domestically in the United States. And instead of saying, yeah, we're spending the money and we own this is public power, this belongs to the people, we're going to go with this, failed model of private ownership, which just opens up opportunities, one, for abuse, but also just needless profiteering while turning your back on the people who need these kind of services. And on this, so that, and I don't want to make this whole thing just a fixation on the green and renewable, industry, because there are much bigger fish to fry still, and that's the fossil fuel industry. And I have a couple of clips from something that I just have found to be so cynical, which is this podcast that Shell, yes, that Shell, Shell Oil Company has been putting out on the solutions to climate change. And maybe one day, Matt, we should do like a deep dive into some of these episodes because they're pretty grand. They're talking about all the big problems, but in every one of these conversations, they have a representative from the Shell Corporation there, and of course, the people who are speaking to them, know that what kind of platform they're on. So the solutions are sort of like abstract, or they fall into this really, really dangerous kind of rhetoric around climate change, where dealing with climate change becomes a kind of like sense of community responsibility that is going to be mediated by like our own personal sacrifice, instead of what it needs to be, which is class war, right? Which is to radically reshape the way that not only we produce energy in the society, but the way that we organize ourselves economically, right? Anyway, let me play some of these things from it, because I think it's pretty rich when you're able to listen to the folks deep inside of the beast, and note who they start to point their fingers at, right? Who are the biggest problems when it comes to dealing with climate change? And this is an interview, I think, from 2019 on the Shell podcast called the Energy Podcast. And the person being interviewed here is Martin Wetzler, who is the Integrated Gas, Renewables, and Energy Solutions Director at Shell. So let me share this with y'all. Be patient. This is a new system for me.
We are not yet there.
It strikes me formidable. Like, I thought people would be absolutely, when you think about what Paris has warned us about, what the IPCC was warning us about, wouldn't it be front of public consciousness to say, yes, you have to make sacrifices. If we want to be in a decarbonized world, we have to actually, dare I say it, stop flying, maybe change our diets, change the way we approach construction, all kinds of things. Do you think consumers are ready to take that on?
I think it's patchy, and I think one of the key issues there is that people want any solution to be fair. So for me as a customer to stop flying when everybody around me continues to do it feels really unfair. There you do need the government to step in and put carbon pricing in, or put tax on kerosene, and to take action that affects everybody in the same way. Voluntary action only goes so far. It is a small percentage of the population that's willing to make sacrifices if they see no one else doing it around them. The other point is, of course, if I'm an average car driver, at the moment I can't even afford an electrical vehicle. They're still way at the top range of the vehicle cost. You can't buy a $10,000 electrical vehicle. They don't exist. So some of the customer offerings really have to still get into the range of customers to get to mass take-up, and we better move soon on that. So partly it isn't there yet, and partly people are willing as long as it's fair and shared. And this is where politicians have a job to do. And they know what to do, they just don't know what to do and get elected again. And we've seen that recently in France, where even a moderate move on fuel taxes has sparked a huge public outcry. So I think we're all learning still how to do this and take people with us.
And of course, while government's trying to work out how to grip public's imagination and make them okay with the...
Oh my God.
So, no, I mean, and for people who aren't familiar, I mean, they're talking right there about the Gilets Jaunes movement, right, in France, where people were pushing back against a fuel tax that, again, these kind of taxes overwhelmingly hit working people, right, and not the people who have been profiting immensely off of this system. And this is not just like a one-off in this podcast. Like that, a big part of the podcast is actually just trying to encourage this kind of rhetoric that the solution is not necessarily to radically reform our economy or the way that our the profit motive functions within it, but rather we need to be shifting the costs on working class people, right? And we also need this kind of, I don't know, like spiritual revolution to like feel worse about climate change so that we get into collective action, right? It's punitive, right? And the people who are being punished here are us and not them.
Yeah, I mean, we're the obstacle. Like, if they could only convince us that we need to do something about it. And the thing that we need to do, and we'll also talk about this in maybe a Patreon episode, but Orwell's wartime writings, when he's talking about the amount of sacrifice people are willing to give up because you're in a war before you really get upset. And the secret formula is make it evident and obvious and true that the wealthy and the most cared for in society are the ones doing most of the sacrificing, and everyone else is plenty happy to do stuff for their country.
Yeah, and and just like the way that the question is posed, I think it's just so cynical, right? It's this kind of like moralistic things like, oh, we should be eating less meat and, flying less, etc., right? Which again is, as Matt Huber, who people should definitely be reading, on all things climate change, brilliantly points out in Jacobin, and pull up. So I'm still not very quick on the draw yet, but we'll get there. Points out in many, many articles in Jacobin that this kind of rhetoric really protects the power structures that harm us. This is a great piece. Rich people are fueling climate catastrophe, but not mostly because of their consumption, right? And as Matt points out in that piece, it's like, yes, rich people consume way more than the vast majority of us. And like, look, it's fine to use that as a political, weapon to encourage maybe some kind of class conflict. But the fact is that the most damaging system is capitalism. And the reason rich people are damaging to the planet is not necessarily just because of the excesses of their lifestyle, but it's because of the profit motive and the profit system that they amass their wealth through, right? And later on in that interview as well, Martin Wetzler makes this point too, right? Which is that he's asked, point blank, should Shell be just spending all of their money on renewables and greening the economy? And he says no, because I have to make sure that my shareholders are happy, right? Which I think and I wanted to bring that up, one, because it's that's actually true. And I'm not even I think there's plenty of moral arguments to be made against these people, but I also think it's important for us as socialists to start thinking materially about these things, right? We could turn that, guys, we could have a Grinch scene with this person. We can get their heart to grow 10 times the size. But as long as their position is the position of managing that much capital and managing, the business operations of Shell, they're always going to take that position, no matter what they even truly personally believe, and no matter how much kind of spiritual development they go through. I think that it's really important that we start preparing for this, just because there's been such a long time, I think, when people do climate discourse on the left, that it's one, convincing people that climate change is real, right? And then convincing people that we need to do something about it. And what we're seeing right now is this kind of move amongst the fossil fuel companies and through their propaganda arms to say oh, look, we understand all these things are real and we really want to do something about it. And then falling on these kind of individual choice model of dealing with climate change, rather than what they should be doing, which is massively pulling back production of oil, right, and paying reparations to all the people that they have slaughtered and harmed throughout this, couple centuries of damage under their watch.
Yeah, and it's funny how they do this move of just sort of fetishizing energy itself, right? This is called the energy podcast. And it's energy is just so important for human living, right? And a guy that was on Dave Rubin's show is this exact thing, and it's that's not the problem with the energy. All that is arguments for this being nationally controlled and not up to the limbs of profiteers, right? And that's right. Anyway, go on.
No, keep going. I think that's exactly right. And look, I think we need to, we'll need to bring on Max soon. So we're not
he's in
everything that we would want to. Yeah, I see him. I'll bring him on in just a second. Everything that we want to get to tonight, we've done lots of conversation with people like Ryan Pollock about things like just transition. But I really want to note this, and before we bring Max on, I do want to share this other conversation. I don't have it in my notes, but this is another Shell representative talking about oil and gas, and actually using this kind of woke, don't leave the developing world behind model for why we can't move away from fossil fuels in the near future.
And I think there is another. Hear your thoughts about what impact that side of the market plays as well. Jessica, can I come to you first of all for your thoughts on that?
Some 80% of all energy today is from some form of fossil fuels, and that's what's fueled tremendous amount of growth over the last several decades. And of course, that is not our future, and we do need to move away from fossil fuels as fast as we can, and we do need to drive for a low carbon future. There's still 1 billion people on the planet today, even with our current system, that don't have access, and we can't forget that all solutions need to address those who don't have access to energy today. But it is, billions and trillions of dollars of assets, of pipelines, of ships that makes the system work. We have to retool all of that, and that will take time. And that's a challenge, because from a climate perspective, we're running out of time.
And
No, I mean, that's just too perfect, right? It's saying that like we need to do something, but also if we can't leave behind all of these people, and like I think in a really despicable way, actually trying to use growing awareness about imperialism and like underdevelopment on other folks, as a way to kind of shield fossil fuel profits.
I mean, this is like how expanding employment rights to gig workers would be just like reproducing the racism of the New Deal. Right. It's the exact same sort of cynical fork-tongued argument.